Director Gunn reveals startling inconsistencies in the Warren Commission report, which you will hear from him. Thank you for joining me again. Oliver Stone's 1991 movie, JFK, did more than entertain wild-eyed audiences about JFK assassination conspiracy theories. It is widely credited with the U.S. Congress passing the very next year a public law called the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992, which directed the National Archives and Records Administration to establish a collection of records to be known as the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection. This Congressional Act additionally established, as an independent agency, the Assassination Records Review Board. The ARRB collected evidence starting in 1992, then produced its final report in 1998. Jeremy Gunn was on this review board for 4 years, first as its Director of Research and General Counsel, and then its Executive Director. Today, you will hear Gunn document startling inconsistencies in the Warren Report. It is quite eye-opening. The audio clip with Gunn is from a 2013 news story, 2013 being the 50th anniversary of JFK's assassination, called Inconsistencies Haunt Official Record of Kennedy's Death. Additionally, in this video, you learn, in case you missed it, about Secret Service agent Paul Landis, who in his 2023 book, The Final Witness, claimed publicly for the first time that he found a pristine bullet sitting on the back seat of the limousine, directly behind where Kennedy had been sitting. He took the bullet, concerned that it might get lost, and placed it on Kennedy's gurney at Parkland Memorial Hospital, and told no one. Landis's account, if true, has significant implications for how the assassination is understood. It creates more unanswered questions about the handling of evidence and why Landis failed to report this information to the Warren Commission. This account fuels speculation of a second gunman. Many were critical of why Landis waited 60 years after the assassination to publicly reveal this. He cited his extreme trauma from witnessing the assassination as the reason he suppressed his memories. The Warren Commission never interviewed him, and his initial report after the assassination did not mention finding the bullet, a point noted by many skeptics. A lawyer on the Warren Commission suggested that Landis's memory may have been corrupted by the traumatic event, and some of Landis's former colleagues, including Secret Service agent Clint Hill, have disputed his new version of events. Let's start, though, with the news report concerning the Assassination Review Board and hear from Jeremy Gunn. I'll conclude with some notes about Mr. Landis's version and the news clip interview. By the way, I had to remove 8 gruesome JFK autopsy photos from this video, but not to worry, my email address is towards the end of this video. I will email them to you.
In 1991, Oliver Stone's movie JFK stirred up lingering questions about the Kennedy assassination, which happened 50 years ago this month. The movie rejected the conclusion of the Warren Commission, the official investigation that placed guilt on Lee Harvey Oswald alone, and instead proposed a vast government conspiracy linked to the CIA. The next year, in response, Congress created something called the Assassination Records Review Board to set the record straight by declassifying material related to the assassination. The board released thousands of documents, but as reporter Marcus Rosenbaum found out, that didn't settle much.
The first thing Jeremy Gunn says when you ask him about the Kennedy assassination is, "I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't have a theory about what happened." But he knows a lot about it. He worked for the Review Board for 4 years as its Director of Research and General Counsel, and then its Executive Director. He read everything he could find in the government's files and questioned dozens of doctors and former officials, many of them under oath.
There were many things that were disturbing.
And not just the well-known questions about the path of the bullet and where the shots came from and Lee Harvey Oswald's odd travels. What really stuck out for him was the medical evidence. Things like his deposition of James Joseph Humes, one of the doctors who performed the autopsy. Humes acknowledged that the autopsy was not performed strictly according to procedure, and then he said something else.
Dr. Humes admitted that the supposedly original handwritten version of the autopsy that is in the National Archives is in fact not the original version.
In a long statement, Humes spoke about taking his notes home the night after the autopsy and remembering how he had once seen the chair Abraham Lincoln had been sitting in when he was shot, stained with Lincoln's blood. Here is an actor reading his testimony.
I thought this was the most macabre thing I ever saw in my life. It just made a terrible impression on me. And when I noticed that these bloodstains were on this document that I had prepared, I said, nobody's ever going to get these documents. So I copied them and burned the original notes in the fireplace.
And those weren't just notes, he told Gunn. They were the first draft of the autopsy report.
He had never stated that publicly to the Warren Commission. He had never been candid about that before.
So Gunn asked him whether there was anything in the original document that was not in the copy. Humes replied, and I quote here, "I don't believe so." Then Gunn turned to another document. Here's the transcript of the questioning, read by actors.
Have you ever observed that the document, now marked Exhibit 1, appears to have bloodstains on it as well?
Yes, I do notice it now. These were J's.
He's referring to J. Thornton Boswell, another doctor at the autopsy.
Did you ever have any concern about the president's blood being on the document that's now marked Exhibit 1?
I can't recall, to tell you the truth.
Do you see any inconsistency at all between destroying some handwritten notes that contain blood on them, but preserving other handwritten notes that also had blood on them?
Well, only that the others were of my own making. I wouldn't have the habit of destroying something someone else prepared.
After that, Gunn showed Humes the official autopsy photographs. Curiously, Humes had never handled them before. The Warren Commission had never shown them to him. Humes found it hard to tell what was what in the pictures. Gunn says it's actually hard for anybody to tell what's what in those pictures, especially when it comes to such important details as whether Kennedy's wounds were entry wounds or exit wounds.
One of the ways that we tried to sort out this story was to find the woman who had developed the original autopsy photographs. Her name's Sandra Spencer. She had never been questioned by the Warren Commission, but we located her.
In November 1963, Sandra K. Spencer was a petty officer in charge of the White House Laboratory at the Naval Photographic Center in Anacostia, Washington, D.C. The day after the assassination, Spencer was informed by her boss that a Secret Service agent would be arriving to have some film negatives be developed. When the agent arrived, he said his name was James K. Fox. Spencer developed the films and discovered they were color photographs of Kennedy's corpse. It took Sandra Spencer just over an hour to develop and dry the prints. Fox gathered up the negative and prints and told her to forget that he had been there. Spencer was interviewed by the Assassination Records Review Board in June 1997. Douglas Horne, who attended the session, was later to remark that she developed post-mortem photography different from that in the archives today. Different type of film and different images. Her photography seemed to be of the body after reconstruction, but before it was clothed and put in the burial casket.
Gunn asked her to look at the autopsy photos from the National Archives. She didn't recognize them.
She said, I didn't develop these. These are not the ones that I developed.
Here's her testimony read by an actor.
The prints that we printed did not have the massive head damages that's visible here. The face, the eyes were closed, and the mouth was closed, and it was more of a rest position than these show.
The official photographs seemed to be taken in a medical setting. The body was bloody. Spencer said the pictures she processed seemed to be taken in a darkened room with a flash.
They were very, what I consider, pristine for an autopsy. There was no blood or opening cavities or anything of that nature. It was quite reverent in how they handled it.
Here's something else. Gunn had asked her to bring with her some prints she had processed for the White House in the days before the assassination.
So these would have been prints printed on, in theory, the very same paper that she had printed the autopsy photographs on.
But the paper on the official photos didn't match the print she'd brought along. They must have been printed at a different time or a different place. Now, Spencer was interviewed 30 years after the event, and that's a long time to remember every detail. But still, Why didn't she recognize any of the official autopsy photos? Why are they on different paper from what she was using at the time? And whatever happened to the pictures she did remember processing? Jeremy Gunn, who is now a history professor, can recite a litany of other unresolved mysteries surrounding the assassination, all questions that the Warren Commission failed to answer. Some believe that's all part of a cover-up, perhaps to hide a conspiracy that reached deep inside government itself. Others point to a more benign explanation. The new president, Lyndon Johnson, was pushing the Warren Commission to come to a conclusion quickly. He wanted to move forward, not look back. And besides, Gunn says, the panel genuinely believed that Oswald had killed Kennedy.
And so they wanted to write the document in a way that would reassure the American public that it was a single gunman acting alone, somebody who's a little bit unstable, and that that's the explanation for what happened.
The downside to that is it looks like a whitewash when the facts aren't clear. But for the Warren Commission, transparency had its own difficulties.
There are serious problems with the forensics evidence, with the ballistics evidence, with the autopsy evidence. And if they had, in my opinion, if they had said that openly, it would have not put the issue to rest.
Faced with that, the Warren Commission went with what it believed. At first, nearly 90% of the public believed them. But within just a couple of years, that number was down to 36%, and today it's less than 25%. Again, Jeremy Gunn.
From my perspective, if the president had been killed as part of a conspiracy, that needed to be known. And wherever the consequences of that point, that should have been done. The institution that had the opportunity to best get to the bottom of this as much as it was possible was the Warren Commission, and they didn't do it.
That's why, 50 years later, this case has still not been closed in the arena of public opinion.
The Warren Commission decided that one of the bullets fired that day struck the president from behind, exited from the front of his throat, and continued on to hit Governor Connally, somehow managing to injure his back, chest, wrist, and thigh. It seemed incredible to many that a single bullet could do all that, so skeptics called it the magic bullet theory. Investigators came to that conclusion partly because the bullet was found on a stretcher believed to have held Governor Connally at Parkland Memorial Hospital, so they assumed it had exited his body during efforts to save his life. But Mr. Landis, who was never interviewed by the Warren Commission, says this is not what happened. In fact, he says he was the one who found the bullet in the presidential limousine lodged in the back of the seat behind where Kennedy was sitting. He said at the hospital he placed it on Kennedy's gurney or stretcher, and at some point, he now guesses, Connally and Kennedy's stretchers must have been pushed together and the bullet was shaken from one to another. Mr. Landis's account varies in a couple of respects from two written statements he filed in the week after the shooting. Aside from not mentioning finding the bullet, he reported hearing only 2 shots. I do not recall hearing a third shot, he wrote, although now he says he heard a third shot. Likewise, he did not mention going into the trauma room where Kennedy was taken, writing that he remained outside by the door when the First Lady went in. Gerald Posner, author of Case Closed, a 1993 book that concluded Oswald indeed killed Kennedy on his own, said he was dubious. While he did not question Mr. Landis's sincerity, Mr. Posner said the story did not add up. People's memories generally do not improve over time, and it is a flashing warning sign to me about skepticism I have over his story, that on some very important details of the assassination, including the number of shots, his memory has gotten better instead of worse, Posner said.
Almost 60 years ago, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated during a visit to Texas. And now a new book from a former Secret Service agent who was right there when it happened hit store shelves today.
That agent, who lives, here in Northeast Ohio, shines a new light on one of the most scrutinized investigations in U.S. history. News 5's Clay Lepard sits down with Paul Landis.
For 88-year-old Paul Landis,
this is the arrival at Love Field and when President Kennedy charged over to be in the crowd.
It took him a long time to open up about his years as a Secret Service agent. The agent, codenamed Debut for his young age.
All the agents at that time, code names began with a D.
First covered the Eisenhower grandchildren, then protected the Kennedy kids, and eventually...
She's very beautiful in this one.
...the First Lady. In fact, that's him right there.
That's the best job I ever had or did. It just so happened, with the time, I was fortunate to be there when I was, and I was unfortunate to be in Dallas when it was.
This longtime Shaker Heights resident is talking about that November day, 1963, when the President and First Lady traveled to Dallas.
Something is wrong here. Something is terribly wrong. President Kennedy has been assassinated. It's official now.
We have suffered a loss that cannot be weighed.
I was right there, right behind, 15, 20 feet, whatever, when his head exploded.
For much of what happened after, Agent Landis can be seen near the former First Lady, from LBJ being sworn in.
I was just peeking around the corner, really.
To the funeral for the former president. Here he is, in the background of that iconic moment with JFK Jr. In Landis's newly released book, his account differs from the official version of the day Kennedy was killed.
I had terrible nightmares after that assassination, and I had been looking at the president when the third shot hit him in the head, and just the vision of everything happening was a loop that just kept going over and over. And that was, even when we traveled, I just say I took that baggage with me wherever we went.
Investigators determined what's known as the magic bullet theory, that one shooter fired all the shots, and one bullet, this one, hit not just the president, but also the governor of Texas in multiple places. Investigators came to the conclusion because the bullet was found on a stretcher for the Texas governor, assuming it had exited his body. But Paul Landis never told his story, that he moved the bullet to a gurney after he found it lodged in the back of the limousine. He didn't want it to get lost.
Yeah, I didn't want that to disappear. It was an important piece of evidence. The unfortunate thing is that I think just with the stress and everything, I have tried to analyze why all the things. I don't have it. I can't really answer. You had to be there to know how bad and how stressful and the chaos that was going on.
He doesn't subscribe to the conspiracy theories out there, but admits he wishes he spoke up earlier about what he remembers from that day. Does this new information in your book, in your opinion, change the conclusion investigators made about how John F. Kennedy died?
I don't know if it'll change the conclusion. It's just another bit of information that they can take and go back and re-examine everything.
Agent Landis left the Secret Service not long after and retreated to a quieter life, away from it all.
It was still painful to think about it or talk about it, and that's why I never talked to anybody about the assassination for 45 years.
In Shaker Heights.
And my quiet life has kind of disappeared.
Clay Lepard, News
Thank
5.
you so much for watching this video. I look forward to your comments.